This is The Chris Berry Show. Expert information on wealth, estate, and tax planning for the second half of life. Information that you can understand. Here's your host, Chris Berry.
And welcome to The Chris Berry Show, where we talk wealth, estate, and tax planning for the second half of life. And each week, we like to start with what we call a positive focus. So this is something positive that happened either personally or professionally within the last week. And this is something that I do with even my family. As we sit down for dinner every night, we go around the table and share something positive that happened, whether it's my son sharing something positive that happened at school, or maybe my daughter sharing how much she enjoyed dance. We like to go around and start with a positive focus, just like we like to start the Chris Berry Show off with a positive focus. And for me, this past week, my positive focus was my son getting back to school, and then with the start of school, that also starts off Cub Scouts. So this will be his second year now in Cub Scouts, and he's going to be, I want to say, a bear this year. I think it was a wolf last year. This year, he's going to be a bear. So he's going into third grade. And it was great to kind of get back together with all of the other Cub Scouts and the Cub Scout parents, reconnect. And we thought it was important for him to join something like Cub Scouts. I was in Cub Scouts for a little bit. I wasn't in for very long. I was involved in a lot of sports and other activities. But I appreciated what Cub Scouts had to offer and Boy Scouts have to offer. And I think it's just great to prepare the little guy for the world. So I'm excited that he's back in Cub Scouts, excited that he's going to be doing fun projects, a lot of outdoor projects. I think this year we're going to be able to spend the night on a submarine, so that's going to be pretty cool. Last year we spent the night at the Air Museum, I want to say in Kalamazoo, and we got to sleep under a F-22 big airplane. It was pretty cool. So it's always cool, always exciting, and I think it's a great way to pair a young child to move into adulthood. And it was great to see him getting back together with all his friends, and he was able to paint this nice little birdhouse that we hung outside the yard. So it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool to see that. So that was my positive focus on my personal front. And this episode of the Chris Berry Show, I'm really excited because we're going to have Dr. Bruno, who's going to share some research surrounding dementia and Alzheimer's. He works for U of M, and he's going to share some really insightful knowledge with regards to what's coming up in terms of Alzheimer's research, as well as ways that you can get involved in helping fight Alzheimer's. We've spent a lot of time this month talking about Alzheimer's disease. One of the reasons is that the Walk To End Alzheimer's is coming up, and that's coming up September 29th, where we're going to shut down Main Street in Brighton, and we're hoping to have over 100 walkers that day, raising awareness and raising funds for Alzheimer's. It's something that we believe in. It's something that I have a personal connection with. It's something that affects a lot of my clients. So it's something that we feel is important to raise awareness and raise money for that. And so if you want to help contribute to the cause, then you can type into your browser the internet, www.alzeldercare.com, to go straight to our website where we're trying to raise funds for the Alzheimer's Association. Or you can go to our main website, thechrisberryshow.com, where there'll be a link where you can click to donate. And even if it's just $5, the amount of a Starbucks coffee, that would be great because every little bit helps. Last year, we were the top fundraising team for the walk, where between contributions and the money we raised, we were able to allocate over $15,000 as a team to the Alzheimer's Association. And then the walk, which we were part of the committee of, we were able to raise over $137,000 last year. So we're trying to beat that this year, so every little bit helps, and we're running out of time because the walk is coming up September 29th. So again, if you do want to contribute to the cause, you can go directly to our website, thechrisberryshow.com, where there'll be a link where you can click over. And so, again, that's going to be the next two segments, actually, of the Chris Berry Show this week. We're going to talk to Dr. Bruno and just do a deep dive into what Alzheimer's is versus dementia. We'll talk about some of the leading research that's coming out of it. We'll talk about the difference between early onset and kind of the traditional Alzheimer's. So stick with us on the second and third segments today of the Chris Berry Show, where we get into it with Dr. Bruno. And so one of the things that I want to share is there's some big news coming out this week, and I just saw it actually coming across. And the big news is as it relates to veterans benefits. And so specifically, there's a certain type of VA benefit that I want to talk about, and there's a big change maybe coming down the pike in how this works. So I thought it'd be important to just go over veterans benefits, especially as we've just recently had September 11th. I thought it'd be important to kind of cover what veterans benefits are, but then also talk about this important change coming down the pike. So veterans benefits, there's a whole slew of veterans benefits that are available. But really there's two main types of monthly benefits that veterans can, or surviving spouses of veterans can receive. And the first one is what's called service-connected compensation. So if you were a veteran who served during wartime and maybe you were shot in the leg and you lost use of your leg, or you're exposed to Agent Orange, and now you have some symptoms because of that, then you might have what's called a service-connected compensation. So it's like a workman's comp type claim, where because of your exposure to Agent Orange or because of your service, you now receive what's called a disability rating. So based on that disability rating, you might get some additional benefits, you might get some health care covered, but you could also get a monthly benefit, a monthly compensation based on that disability rating. And that benefit could be as much as $2,000, $3,000 per month as compensation. So that's what's called service-connected compensation. Now, what I typically deal with and what we typically deal with more so is what's called non-service connected pension. And you might also hear this called aid in attendance. And why this is important, why we deal with this and why I talk about it on the Chris Berry Show is because there are a lot of veterans and surviving spouses out there. And this non-service connected pension, even if you weren't wounded or anything during wartime, can bring in additional money specifically to help pay for long-term care, which for a lot of individuals, as we're kind of planning for the second half of life, that's one of the big concerns is how do we pay for long-term care? Well, this non-service connected pension, otherwise known as the aid and attendance benefit, is a way that we can bring in an extra $1,000 to $2,000 a month to help pay for long-term care, which it's not going to pay for nursing home care at $8,000 to $12,000 a month. It's not going to cover that bill, but it is going to help pay for maybe home care or assisted living, which could be $2,000 to $3,000 a month, or assisted living could be $4,000 or $5,000 a month. You couple someone's Social Security and pension, now add in this non-service connected VA benefit on top of that. Well, I've had some of our clients say it's almost like a money tree where kind of everything maintains and the assets remain protected because of this additional VA benefit income coming in. So to qualify for this non-service connected pension, otherwise known as aid and attendance, there's really 5 requirements. So the first requirement is 90 days active duty. So the veteran needs to have served for 90 days of active duty. It doesn't need to have been consecutive. It could be split up, but 90 days active duty. The second requirement is 1 day during a period of conflict. So this is periods of conflict defined by Congress. So things like World War II, Korea, Vietnam, etc. And now Vietnam can be kind of fuzzy because technically we had individuals boots on the ground prior to that declared period of conflict. But if we can prove that they were boots on the ground, then that still works. So 90 days active duty, 1 day during a period of conflict. And then the third requirement is you cannot be dishonorably discharged. So if you have an honorable discharge, you're good to go. So again, first 3 requirements, 90 days active duty, 1 day during a period of conflict, cannot be dishonorably discharged. And then this benefit is also available to surviving spouses as long as they have a death certificate and a marriage license for that veteran. So typically for those first 3 requirements, all we need to do is look for that DD-214 otherwise known as separation papers or discharge papers. And that'll provide us all the information we need for those first three requirements. Now, the fourth requirement, and this is where it gets a little more complicated, the fourth requirement is we need to have more long-term care costs going out than we have income coming in from Social Security and pension. So let's talk about this a little bit. So let's say that we have a veteran who has a Social Security of $1,500 a month, plus they worked at Ford and they have a $400 a month pension. So the total income would be $1,900 a month. So to qualify for the VA benefit, they need to be paying out about $2,000 a month worth of long-term care costs. So those long-term care costs could be for an assisted living, could be for a commercial home care company, or even could be us, that veteran paying maybe a son or daughter or a family member under a personal care contract for that care. So as long as we have more long-term care costs going out than we have income coming in from Social Security and pension, then we're going to pass the income test, which is the fourth requirement. So we have 90 days active duty, 1 day during a period of conflict, cannot be dishonorably discharged. Now, the fifth requirement, and this is where we might have a change in law coming down the pike. The fifth requirement is an asset test. And basically, if you have more than $30,000 worth of countable assets, chances are you're not going to qualify. So countable assets are everything other than things like a home, automobile, personal belongings, etc. Everything else is going to count as a countable asset. So the great thing about the program now is that you could have a veteran who's over in assets, and all we'd have to do is set up a Veterans Asset Protection Trust, and then the next month we'd be able to submit an application and it could get approved. So if you're over in assets, we set up a Veterans Asset Protection Trust, basically put that money in a piggy bank for the veteran where they can still get access to it potentially. But we set up that Veterans Asset Protection Trust, and then the next month we could submit an application, and it will be approved. Now, it's not approved right away. Typically, what we find is that when you submit a VA application, it might take 3 to 5 months before their approval gets passed, but the benefit is retroactive, so it will pay back benefits from the time that the application was submitted. So the great thing, again, about the program now is that there's no look-back period. So if you remember on previous episodes, we've talked about how Medicaid has a 5-year look-back period when we're trying to get qualified for nursing home care. Well, with this VA benefit, there's no look-back period. So what we've been able to do is set up a Veterans Asset Protection Trust, move the assets into the trust, and then get qualified for this VA benefit to help a veteran who served our country or surviving spouse who may have lost their spouse, maybe potentially due to things that happened during the time of service. So it's a benefit available to those that served. And so that's why as a VA accredited attorney, it's my job to basically remove those barriers that the VA puts down between veterans and their benefits. Now, the potential change that's coming through, and this has been something that they've been talking about since 2015, but we just saw more movement on the bill. So what they've been talking about is instituting a 3-year look-back period for this VA benefit. So what that means is that a veteran or surviving spouse of a veteran who might be in need of home care or assisted living would have to potentially wait over 3 years if they were to set up a Veterans Asset Protection Trust and move those assets into the trust. Versus the way we have it now, with currently there's no look-back period. So it may make sense to do something like this, but understand the only people that are hurting by this change in law are the veterans and surviving spouses. You're basically taking away one of their ways to help pay for long-term care or postponing when they're able to receive these benefits. So I just question the purpose of this change in law because it's not like it's going to generate a lot of income savings or anything for the government. Really, all you're doing is you're penalizing veterans and surviving spouses of veterans who have served our country or had a spouse that served this country and now they're in need because maybe they're diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia and they have to pay out $5,000, $10,000 a month for their care. Because there's a USA Today article that said if you're diagnosed with dementia today, the lifetime cost of that is going to be $730,000. So the question is, how are you going to pay for that? And now with this potential change in law coming about, you're just taking away one of the ways that veterans and surviving spouse of veterans have to help pay for the devastating cost of long-term care. Because we don't go from healthy to passing away, we go through this aging process. And if you're a veteran or surviving spouse or you served our country, I think you should have every advantage possible. So I really question this potential change in law coming about. They've suggested that it may be instituted as soon as December, but we'll see what happens with that. And if you are a veteran or surviving spouse and you are concerned about long-term care costs, now is the time to try to get that application in to maybe set up that Veterans Asset Protection Trust. And if you do want more information on this VA benefit, it's something that we talk about in our weekly workshops. We have workshops throughout Metro Detroit, whether it's Brighton, Novi, Livonia, or Bloomfield Hills. And if you want more information on those workshops, feel free to go to thechrisberryshow.com or give us a call to register at 810-355-2584. Space is limited for these workshops, but we do them about once a week. This last workshop, we had a couple of families who had veterans, and they're asking some great questions with regards to this VA benefit. Because again, it's a great way that we can bring in an additional $1,000 to $2,000 a month tax-free. But unfortunately, the government may be changing the rules on us and making it more difficult to qualify. So it's important to try to get that application in as soon as possible because most likely they'll grandfather those applications, and if you've submitted already. So thought it was important to share that update. It is something that fits into this month's discussion of Alzheimer's because it is one of the ways that we can pay for long-term care. And please stick with us after the break. Very excited to have Dr. Bruno talking more about Alzheimer's. So see you after the break. Take care.
If you or a loved one is facing long-term care costs, make sure you talk with certified elder law attorney Chris Berry from the Elder Care Firm, like Sherry Skelton and her family did from Fenton.
It's really scary when you know that your parent deserves a certain quality of life and you're not able to afford it unless you get these benefits. And that was the place where we were at. We were like, we couldn't take care of her. We all had families of our own. We all worked. And of course, we wanted her in the best possible place that we could afford. And none of that would have been, never would have been able to do that if it wasn't for them. I always recommend Chris. And I always tell people when they have any questions, I just say, you know what, you need to contact this guy because I can't even begin to tell you what he did for my family.
Hello, I'm attorney Chris Berry. The Elder Care Firm is here to help you and your family find solutions. Call us today.
Protect your assets from probate, long-term care costs, the IRS, and get the governmental benefits you deserve. Visit theeldercarefirm.com today or call 810-214-3800.
Welcome back to the Chris Berry Show. This is your host, Chris Berry, where we talk wealth, estate, and tax planning for the second half of life. And I'm super excited to have a special guest on the show today, Dr. Bruno Giordani from the Michigan Alzheimer's Disease Center. Welcome, Dr. Bruno.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hey, Dr. Bruno, a couple of our previous guests recommended that we bring you on the show, specifically talking about Alzheimer's, dementia, that type of thing. Could you talk a little bit about maybe your background and what makes you an expert in this area?
Sure. I guess I'm an expert for a couple of reasons. One is that this is work I've been doing most of my life. I started a long time ago in Mount Sinai in New York, which was one of the first national Alzheimer's centers in the country. These are centers that are specialized across the country for studying Alzheimer's disease. And then I joined the University of Michigan faculty where we have
Did you say U of M?
I did, I'm sorry.
As MSU grad, we're going to stop the show now.
I had promised I wouldn't bring that up. I'm sorry. I should say MADC,
okay.
Michigan Alzheimer's Disease Center. And actually, funny you should mention that. The MADC, the Michigan Alzheimer's Center, and our current large NIH project we have called the the Alzheimer's Disease Coordinating Center actually stretches across 3 universities, Wayne State, University of Michigan, and both MSU campuses.
Oh, well,
so
there we
you
go.
guys get 2.
Okay,
So,
yeah.
this is unique among all these centers in the nation because we have folks on the cores, what we call cores, which are sort of the primary units as well as the leadership from all 3 universities interacting. So it really is a collaborative process.
Yeah, that's outstanding. One of the things I'm a part of is what's called the Dementia Coalition of Michigan. And again, it's like multidisciplinary, different schools all involved coming together for this great disease, this cause that we're trying to kind of better understand. So what drew you to this area in the first place?
Actually, it was an area that was fascinating to me at first because when I was first getting interested in this work, I was at University of Virginia studying cognitive difficulties early in life, came here, did postdoctoral training when we first developed the Alzheimer's Center. So that was, I won't tell you how many years in the past, but you can tell people how white my hair is. But and then went to New York to work at their Alzheimer's Center and came back here. I guess in one sense it was because this has sort of been a lifetime work, as well as both of my parents had dementia.
Oh, wow.
So that we cared for them or had them in local. They had both been attorneys in Washington, D.C., and so we eventually brought them back to Ann Arbor using the grandchildren as a lure,
Sure.
and got them back here, and eventually they were in senior centers and then came to live with us.
Okay, so you've walked the walk, so to
Yep.
speak. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's keeping you busy in your current role?
Well, currently I am the associate director of the center as well as the associate director of the coordinating center of our NIH program. We also have a number of different grants. We've been NIH, people pay their taxes. NIH has money for research. And it's very good that we've had solid support now from each president actually in increasing that fund of dollars with the recognition that this is such a critical problem. So that we've been very lucky too with our new center to have gotten several grants. So we have, I'm associated with a number of ongoing grants. One of them in Detroit, where we're looking at how to really get out into the community and involve individuals as part of our center. We also have a new supplement where that I direct, which is actually looking at how to increase the number of men, and in particular African American men in research. So we're looking at a number of different options. Our center has a number of different ongoing research trials and other things going on. So it's kind of busy.
Sure.
It's kind of busy.
Yeah, so every day is a little bit different,
Yep.
it sounds like. Great. So, and I know we've covered this in previous episodes, but maybe you could help us. What's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia?
Well, that's sort of the big question everybody asks, which comes first, one or the other. But in truth, a dementia is the kind of, they like to call it the umbrella term. So you figure that probably something like 50 to 70% of individuals with dementia have Alzheimer's. Dementia means a decline in ability to such an extent that it affects your everyday life. So if somebody has a significant cognitive decline so they really can't exist and function normally in their everyday life, that becomes a dementia. Then you've got to understand the reasons why. So Alzheimer's disease is the biggest, obviously, of that. Vascular dementia sort of comes next in terms of percentages, but many vascular dementias and Alzheimer's disease interact with each other too. And then of course, there's Lewy body disease and frontal temporal dementia, which are, although not as prevalent, nearly as prevalent, they are very serious disorders that have just tremendous effects on the family.
Sure. And so I guess from two points of view, I see it a lot from the family perspective, and they kind of lump it all together. Is there any importance in differentiating it from the family perspective? And then I'd assume for sure there is from the research side of things.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very perceptive question. I mean, the problem is we can't just say it's a dementia. It's really important to understand what underlies the dementia. So, for example, Alzheimer's disease has a different picture than Lewy body disease, has a different treatment set of potentials other than Lewy body disease. Frontal temporal dementia is different from the others as well, so that if you understand that somebody has frontal temporal dementia, it affects the front part of the brain. The front part of the brain is our part that controls appropriate behavior. It also even controls our sense of time and what we're doing. Somebody may have difficulties like that, and that's a very different type of pattern in the way the family has to resolve as compared to somebody who has a predominantly memory pattern. Lewy body disease patients often will have sort of ups and downs. They'll have more visual problems and things. So if you understand what the disease is, what the underlying type of dementia is, you can help the family approach that very differently, and it affects the type of treatment trials we try.
Sure.
Treatment drugs.
Yeah. And so when we typically see them, there's some confusion of whether it's Alzheimer's, dementia, or one of the different forms of dementia. Is it at the kind of family doctor level where they'll understand the differences? Do families have to seek out specialists?
I mean, it is important for you to talk to your family physician about it. We have, and honestly, having done this for a long time in the past, physicians tended to maybe say, oh, you're just getting old. Oh, when we get old, we have problems and issues. But really, that's not true. We know that people age gracefully and well. When there are clear problems happening, that's a time when you need an evaluation. Often it's not really done at the family physician's level. It's done by a neurologist specialist or a geriatrician specialist. U of M has a number of specialty centers. The Alzheimer's Association does a lot of referring out to available centers and things like that.
Sure, yeah. And you mentioned something, and we were even talking about this before the show, of what's the difference between just normal aging versus dementia, Alzheimer's, something that we should be concerned about, like forgetting names or forgetting where I put the keys? Is that something where now all of a sudden we have an issue?
So now we're picking out the things I mentioned I do, right? That I admitted to at the beginning of the show. Look, the point is that as we get older or as we get busier, we all have little issues back and forth. My kids are always joking that I haven't remembered a name since age 25. But it's when you do, and there are, for example, the Alzheimer's Association, like available on the Michigan Great Lakes chapter website, or the other chapter websites include a set of sort of 10 key signs. If you start thinking about those signs, but people who begin to have repeating the same questions, begin to do memory things that aren't like the rest of us really do different things. We all worry about the stove being on. We all come back and forth. But when it begins to interfere with your daily life to a point, then it's a real problem of concern.
Sure, yeah. And you brought up the 10 warning signs. Actually, September 19th, we're going to have someone from the Alzheimer's Association presenting on the 10 warning signs, 6 p.m. at our Brighton office. And if you want more information on that, you can go to thechrisberryshow.com, where you can then click through and register, and also see the phone number to register for that workshop.
That's great.
Now, we're talking about the warning signs. I guess are there any kind of risk factors that might predispose someone to Alzheimer's or dementia, or would it be different between the two?
I mean, these are things we're really learning about right now. So, for example, I attend the Alzheimer's Association International Conference annually. If you look at what's been going on in that conference over the years, because I can't remember what number we're on now, but you see a real change in some of the work, and you get people from all around the world sort of looking at what are risk factors across the world now, so we can do comparisons and understand that better. But we know there are basic risk factors. The biggest risk factor is age. Right? So if you're over age 65, that's a risk. If you're over age 85, you're 40 to 50% risk.
Sure. So how do we stop aging?
Age is I wish I could tell you that. It's but that's a critical feature, because if that's the biggest, what's the worst problem what's the biggest issue going on now? There are a lot more of us my age, right?
Sure. Yep.
Because we live longer than we ever did before, and we're all baby boomers. You've got a lot more dark hair than I do.
I do have a fair amount of gray, but
Okay,
I appreciate it. I'll take that compliment.
But baby boomers, it has moved sort of the number of older individuals dramatically across time from the 60s to now.
Yeah.
So you have a much larger group of people to worry about. We also know there are other sort of classic risk factors we've come to understand. If you're Black or Hispanic, that's a risk. If you're a woman, that's a risk. And other than the fact that women may live longer than men or whatever, women have a particular risk for Alzheimer's. We also know that there are some genetic factors now. We understand genetics better every day, but it's so complex we can't understand it as much. So, for example, certain sort of triad of genes is basically a 50-50 chance if you have it, but that's a very tiny, tiny proportion of the people in the world, about 200,000 in the world, that have these markers for high risk. But we also know that other genetic sort of patterns tend to show risks as well. We're just beginning to learn that and work through it. We also know that things like repeated sort of serious head injuries are the key. But the other thing we know, you said can't do anything about age, but one thing you can do something about is medical illness. We know that people who have uncontrolled diabetes, hypertension, cholesterol, those kind of problems that involve lipid systems and other things are a real risk factor. And we know if you can lower those through exercise, diet, appropriate medication, your risk goes down.
Sure.
So we also know that people under high stress or people who avoid social situations seem to have a higher risk. We also know that people who aren't out there regularly exercising, that tends to heighten your risk.
Yeah. So one of the things you mentioned is kind of the genetic variants or genetic tracers.
Yeah.
So just even personally, I took one of those 23andMe tests. Have you ever heard of one of those?
Yeah.
It's kind of a genetic,
Sure.
tracks your heritage, that
$330 and you get
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they have all your data and they can clone you at some point, apparently. But one of the things that showed up for me was that and maybe you can speak to it or maybe not, is that I do have a genetic variant that predisposes me to Alzheimer's. So is that where I'm in part of the 1 of 200,000, or is that testing something else maybe?
If you were in the 1 of 200,000, you would have undoubtedly a strong family history of very early onset.
Sure.
Because the key with that is people who are developing Alzheimer's in their 30s, 40s, 50s, that very early onset group. There are some pattern groups around the world like this. So there's a group in Medellin, Colombia, where this has been a critical factor because there's such a serious problem. The Alzheimer's Association has actually gone around the world and identified families with this type of high risk. Because don't forget, the point here is that, maybe not you, but people of my age are kind of developing all these other issues, like a little bit of hypertension, diabetes, things that kind of maybe mess up the diagnosis, mess up the treatment. But if you can study individuals with early onset, you have more of the pure version. And we know that basically the early onset and the aging onset are the same. It's the same underlying disease process. Now, it depends upon, I don't know what gene they told you have. Many people carry the ApoE gene. They carry 2 variants, they carry 4, but the ApoE gene is really not a high predictor, but it does seem to raise the risk a little bit. There are other genes. There's the TOM gene that seems to raise the risk a little bit. But those few little triad that I mentioned are extremely small number of people.
Okay.
The other genes kind of fit into the general risk factors.
Sure.
They're all part of the same thing.
Okay. All right. So what we'll do is we'll take a short break, and then we'll be back with Dr. Bruno to talk more about Alzheimer's, dementia, and the research going behind it. We'll talk about the Alzheimer's International Conference. And if you do want more information or want to help support the Walk To End Alzheimer's, which is going to be September 29th in Brighton, you can go to thechrisberryshow.com, where there'll be a link to either donate to the cause, or you can go ahead and join our team and participate in the walk that's going to be that Saturday, September 29th. I think we're getting kicked off at about 10 o'clock. So join us after the break with more from Dr. Bruno.
The cost of long-term care can be overwhelming. If you're dealing with long-term care costs, make plans to attend the next free informative workshop from the Elder Care Firm in Brighton. They'll show you how to protect your hard-earned assets and obtain the governmental benefits you deserve, including veterans benefits and Medicaid.
Hello, I'm attorney Chris Berry. As the only certified elder law attorney in Livingston County, I have the knowledge and estate planning strategies to help you. When you call, reserve your seat at our next workshop or schedule a free 15-minute phone consultation. The Elder Care Firm is here to help you and your family find solutions. Call us today.
Spots are filling up for the next free Elder Care Firm workshop. Reserve your seat today by calling 810-214-3800 or visit theeldercarefirm.com. The Elder Care Firm also invites you to join them at this year's Walk To End Alzheimer's. The walk is on Saturday, October 1st in downtown Brighton. Call 810-214-3800 today.
Welcome back to the Chris Berry Show. We're your host, Chris Berry, where we talk wealth, estate, and tax planning for the second half of life. And we have a very special guest, continuing from the previous segment, Dr. Bruno Giordani from the Michigan Alzheimer's Disease Center. So welcome back, Dr. Bruno. Thanks for sticking with us after the break. And so we were talking selfishly about my own 23andMe results, how I have at least some type of genetic variant that predisposes me with Alzheimer's. But it sounds like it might not be the 1 in 200,000 because that's typically tied to specific kind of areas. Is that?
Yeah, and I also think that A, you would see your clear family history,
Sure.
and B, they would have contacted you.
Yeah. And also one of the things you mentioned right before the break was early onset Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. And you said something that I found interesting that I guess I always had in my back of the head, or in the back of my head, that it was kind of a different form of Alzheimer's. But what you're saying is
It really is the same basic form. I mean, we sort of think we pretty much know what happens in Alzheimer's. There's arguments back and forth as to which thing comes first or which thing doesn't, but we know that a certain change happens in the normal functioning of the brain, and basically proteins that are, I'd say, normally absorbed by the brain, we all need proteins to exist and things, they begin to clump because they're the wrong sort of shape, and they form what's called amyloid. Mm-hmm. And as amyloid develops in the brain, it kind of forms these things called plaques, these big patches, mm-hmm. and eventually they affect the cells, and tau, which is an important part that sort of keeps the cells together, starts to fall when amyloid and tau interact, and that seems to be sort of the place where things really go wrong. And then eventually tau invades the cells begin to die, but it's only after cells really die that you diagnose. Because, right, we only diagnose with memory problems.
Sure.
But the truth is that amyloid is occurring, is being laid down 20 or more, 25 more years before you even see a symptom.
Okay.
So that this is happening so early. So that's sort of the excitement going on now, is that we now know that we can see this amyloid early. Mm-hmm. And if you can track this and see if, some individuals don't develop Alzheimer's, but you have to have amyloid to have Alzheimer's.
Okay.
So it becomes a key factor. It becomes a risk factor. So we have this really exciting way of potentially judging risk. And then with tau, we have a marker for sort of as the disease very first begins to progress, before you even see changes in brain cells and really obvious changes, you can watch tau. So now we have two sort of biomarkers, two imaging biomarkers, or from the cerebrospinal fluid, where we can measure both in CSF, where you can really measure the disease long before it appears.
Okay. And I'd like to talk more about that in a second, but so I guess two questions I have. First, why do we make a distinction between early onset and just regular Alzheimer's if it's kind of the same thing? And then the second is more of a comment of, I guess, anecdotally, I've maybe seen or had in my head that it seems like early onset progresses a lot quicker than normal.
That's two interesting questions. As a matter of fact, recent information has sort of come out around both of them. But they're not really two different disease processes. But some people get this disorder very young.
Sure.
And it's an extremely small number of people. But again, the key for why the Alzheimer's Association has gone around the world to find these individuals is because these are the individuals where you can really, they may be most helped from research, but we also know, for example, that if you have early onset, you're going to develop your disease within 5 years of that parent who developed it. So if you can do that, and if we can show that that person, if they have amyloid in their brain and they carry that genetic risk, they don't develop Alzheimer's, you've got real potential to show that maybe you have actually prevented it. So, for example, there are 5 key what they call prevention trials going on, and a couple of them are developed from the Alzheimer's Association listing as well as from that group down in Colombia to actually study whether you can slow the prevention or prevent this disorder. So it's a pretty amazing process going on. But the other sort of side bent on that I'll just mention to you is that August Dieter, who was the very first patient in 1906 or whatever it was, that Alzheimer's first Dr. Alzheimer's, he first found her. She turned out to have early onset. And because she had early onset, that's one of the reasons people say, well, if this disorder it's been around forever, but it's been identified for 100 years. People say, well, if it's been identified, why haven't you done so much research? Well, really, from about 1906 into the 70s, not much research was done because, again, they thought this was this tiny population of individuals. And it took us into the 70s, really, and 80s. We didn't have an official diagnosis for Alzheimer's disease till about 1984. So that even though it's been here for centuries, nobody figured it out till then. So that's why not that much research had been done. So now there's this explosion. But that's part of the reason why we've had so many changes in these other conditions, changes in HIV, cancer, heart disease compared to Alzheimer's, because we just haven't had the time nor the dollars for that point.
Sure, yeah. And so you mentioned some testing that can be done now. Can you kind of expand on that?
Well, there's currently the only assessments are really a clinical evaluation. Okay. So that's an evaluation that occurs that usually involves someone meeting with their physician. They may do some imaging studies to look for some obvious factors. They may do cognitive neuropsychological testing to kind of get a picture for what type of difficulties the person's really having. These in many ways are ways to rule out.
Okay.
But at the same time, there are new and exciting research things going on, like those PET scans, what they call amyloid scans and tau scanners that are beginning to be out there. The problem is they're so expensive, we just can't do it.
Okay, so that's not something that's available to the public necessarily yet?
Yeah, because you figure those two scans together are around $14,000. These are things right now for research, but once you get one or two, price starts to go down as people compete for scanners.
Sure.
CSF analysis, for example, doing a spinal tap is only $450. It tells you both tau and amyloid. You will see that more and more clinics will offer this as an option, but it's not kind of something that people are willing to do in the U.S.
Sure. Okay. All right. Now, you mentioned that kind of there's this exciting boom in research and things coming about. And I know you recently attended the Alzheimer's Association, the International Conference. Can you speak to maybe some of the things happening there?
Sure. There was a lot of excitement at this one. Sometimes it starts to drag by the end, but in this one we're sort of bouncing from back and forth. There, for example, was information about 2 new drugs discussed.
Sure.
And these are the first of what they call Plaque Busters, so drugs that can be used in early Alzheimer's to sort of break up that plaque I mentioned that starts to form from the amyloid. And the thought of is if I get rid of that, tau will never get in contact that much. It won't be so bad. We now have 2 drugs that in their early stages of research look like they may potentially have an effect. One is aducanumab, and hopefully I got that name right.
Easy for you to say.
I know. And the other one's easy. It's BAN 2401.
Okay.
Both of those drugs, and some of the research was done at U of M as well on these medications. Both of those drugs seem to show that the higher the dose, the more amyloid was removed and the better the cognitive performance became. So this is really exciting stuff for the potential for the future. I mean, again, these are smaller scale studies, but it's really possible to see. The other study that came out that was very exciting, last year and the year before, there was a lot of discussion about the finger studies. This was a study, the finger itself study was the first study was started in Finland. Okay. And that's a study that said, okay, look, we know that I already mentioned to you, health conditions, cognitive, without cognitive involvement too much, medical problems. Let's take care of all those things at once. Let's get people to go out and exercise, eat properly, take care of their health, do cognitive training, do it in a social situation. Let's do all those things and see what happens. And this was a large Finnish study. And in the first 2 years of this study, they already saw a dramatic sort of improvement in cognition among very middle-aged, late middle-aged individuals. So that was really exciting. So the Alzheimer's Association put a lot into that research now, and there are actually finger studies around the world coordinated by the Alzheimer's Association. And the Alzheimer's Association in this country has actually funded its own research looking at this called the Pointer Study. Because we don't want to call it, you get my idea.
Right.
But the Pointer Study is a good name for it too. But that study is, again, going to look at all these issues together and say, look, rather than studying one little thing here, one little thing there, let's do these things all together. So that was exciting, still the discussion about these studies being coordinated. Another study that was really exciting was called the Sprint Mind Study. That's the first study to really take a large number of individuals and look at doing something about hypertension. So if you take individuals with hypertension, rather than just lowering it to the standard 140 range that's sort of what's expected, what if we push it down even further into the 120s, into 120 and below? That group showed a significant reduction in declines and things over time in cognition. So it really appeared that the lower blood pressure was associated with sort of better cognitive ability over time. So that was a really sort of exciting study, fits in with the finger and pointer studies, but that was a piece that even says, heck, let's look at hypertension.
Sure. Sounds interesting that like a lot of these studies are involving kind of more holistic approach where it's going to affect not just Alzheimer's, dementia,
Absolutely.
but a whole slew of...
Because I think the point is we used to only talk about what was the disease problem and what's the best drug. I think everybody has pretty much recognized the fact now that we pretty much know what's going on. We haven't found a magic bullet. And now we need to think about collections of magic bullets together from a medical standpoint. And we need to help the whole person. And frankly, the other benefit with that is I can produce a pill for you, but you can make these same changes. You can change your diet, health, exercise, cognitive stimulation, all those things on your own.
And this might be kind of my cynical looking at things, but given kind of this more holistic approach, I guess where's the funding coming from? Because there is no magic pill, as you said. A lot of times with magic pills, it's all backed by the pharmaceutical who's taking a shot, and if it works, then the pharmaceutical company is going to get rich.
Well, two things. One is Alzheimer's Association has pumped a ton of money into the Pointer Study and coordinating all these finger studies, because one of the keys with this finger study also is let's look at each country and decide how best to present things. That's one thing. And National Institute of Health. You can still get solid studies done, and you don't have to worry about sort of potential pharmaceutical issues or things like that because you're approaching. But the other thing, look, about the pharmaceutical companies is they recognize that this is a hard nut to crack, and they've come together. The Alzheimer's Association has brought a number of them together to look at these things in tandem, and you sort of, sorry about this, but you sort of keep all the attorneys on the outside of the room,
hey now.
and you talk together about what's the best way to coordinate research findings and things, and that's been a big thing.
No, that's outstanding. That's awesome. Yeah. And so if people want to get involved in Alzheimer's research, what can they do?
two big things. One is get involved. You already mentioned it in the walk. There's
Sure.
the Brighton Walk, September 29th. The Michigan Great Lakes chapter of the Alzheimer's Association organizes these walks in the area. I just finished doing sort of a swing of talks through the state. These are important. The other thing you can do is register for Trial Match. Very simple thing. Anybody themselves can go to the U.S. government website and find that. If anybody's ever gone to a U.S. government website, you know what you're getting into.
Sure.
So Trial Match will do that for you. You put your name in, your email. They don't pester you. They don't enroll you in any studies, but they give you sort of little updates as to what's going on in the area. So studies we do, studies Michigan State does, studies Wayne does, studies Central Michigan do. They're all listed on there, so they pick up from the government website these studies. You can do that. You can volunteer for research studies we have going on in the Michigan Alzheimer's Disease Center. You just look up our website at U of M. You can volunteer across the other. Lo and behold, there's even researchers at Michigan State. You know.
Go great.
I'm sorry, I have some real friends there. But you know, all these are ways for you to participate. You can donate to the Alzheimer's Association. You can donate to our Alzheimer's Center. You can donate to other groups as well. All of these things are important. But one of the biggest ones I can think of is give your time to the association. Volunteer like you've been doing so much work in this area. Get out for the walks. Get out to be on the board. Get out to get these things done.
Well, Dr. Bruno, I appreciate you coming on the show.
Sure.
I appreciate all the information and for sure all of the work and effort that you've put into your career to help fight this disease. And so I just want to thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And we'll have Dr. Bruno Giordani's contact information through the Community Relations and Events Coordinator, Aaron Fox. We'll share that on the website, thechrisberryshow.com. You can call the Michigan Alzheimer's Disease Center if you do have questions at 734-232-2459. And we'll have that information as well as the website on thechrisberryshow.com. And if you do want to get involved, the Walk to End Alzheimer's is going to be September 29th in Brighton. Last year we had over 600 walkers. This year we hope to have over 800 walkers to 1,000 walkers. Last year we raised over $137,000. This year we hope to raise more than that. And so again, Dr. Bruno, I appreciate you coming on the show.
Happy to come.
Thank you very much. And join us next week on The Chris Berry Show. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Learn more about Chris Berry and how he can help your family by visiting online at thechrisberryshow.com. That's thechrisberryshow.com. You can also call Chris Berry at 810-355-2584. That's 810-355-2584. This program content reflects the opinions of Chris Berry and his guests, not the elder care firm, Prosperity Capital Advisors, or the C.J. Berry Group, and is subject to change at any time without notice. Content provided herein is for informational purposes only and should not be used or construed as investment or legal advice, or a recommendation regarding the purchase or sale of any security, or to follow any legal or tax strategy. There's no guarantee that the strategist's statements, opinions, or forecasts provided herein will prove to be correct. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Indices are not available for direct investment. Any investor who attempts to mimic the performance of an index would incur fees and expenses which would reduce returns. All investing involves risk, including the potential for loss of principal. There's no guarantee that any investment plan or strategy will be successful. We recommend that you consult with a professional dedicated to your needs. This program is furnished by the Elder Care Firm.
The cost of long-term care can be overwhelming. If you're dealing with long-term care costs, make plans to attend the next free informative workshop from the Elder Care Firm in Brighton. They'll show you how to protect your hard-earned assets and obtain the governmental benefits you deserve, including veterans benefits and Medicaid.
Hello, I'm attorney Chris Berry. As the only certified elder law attorney in Livingston County, I have the knowledge and estate planning strategies to help you. When you call, reserve your seat at our next workshop or schedule a free 15-minute phone consultation. The Elder Care Firm is here to help you and your family find solutions. conversations. Call us today.
Spots are filling up for the next free Elder Care Firm workshop. Reserve your seat today by calling 810-214-3800 or visit theeldercarefirm.com. The Elder Care Firm also invites you to join them at this year's Walk to End Alzheimer's. The walk is on Saturday, October 1st in downtown Brighton. Call 810-214-3800 today.